All right, is that working? Oh yeah, okay. Well.
Is that...
Oh, hello. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. It's really lovely to see you all. My name's Joel.
I'm Laura. Nice to see you.
And this is the last night of our little tour, so it's great to be in a Housmans, like legendary Housmans. My dad had a Housmans diary since I was a kid, so I'm a bit like, oh shit, this is real. It's like, I haven't been here before though. But yeah, no, it's a real honour to be here, and thanks so much for having us. And I'm really excited to just kind of try and have a bit of a chat about this book and some of the ideas that we've been writing about together for a couple of years. We actually met through writing about friendship and started writing this book and became friends through writing it. So that's, if anything, that's an endorsement, of some of the ideas. Would recommend. Mm-hmm. We're going to do a bit of reading, hopefully not too much. It's very hot. We're keen to hear from you all. Just kind of open it up after that and have a chat and do some questions, comments. As I said, if anyone is just kind of feeling woozy or whatever or needs to move around, please do. And obviously, don't want it to feel precious. So if you need to just leave for a bit or go to the toilet, by all means. So the book's called Friends in Common, Radical Friendship and Everyday Solidarities. It came out on the 20th, so I haven't had it that long. But it's been great to try and kind of talk about it for the last 10 days. I guess just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview, the book's basically trying to talk about how friendship is important to radical politics and how friendship has been important historically to movements for political change, and try and not kind of just dismiss it as something that's the kind of leftover bits after comradeship wanes. We can get into that as we have done most nights, which has been great. So we kind of talk a bit about that. We talk a bit about how we feel friendship has been particularly historically ascendant in a kind of our lifetimes as a kind of political common sense for organising in some ways. Or kind of sometimes in the language of affinity or other languages, but definitely in opposition to sort of formalise party politics and comradeship, perhaps with a little blip around Corbyn as well, which we can talk about too. We have a chapter about family abolition and thinking about that body of work from the perspective of friendship. Can we kind of start practicing forms of family abolition through friendship? But we have sections on, we have interviews with some of our friends that helped us write the book, including Gary Bhattacharya, Grace May Bradley, and Luke Dinarona. We have a section on work. So what kind of friendships are possible through work? How do we organise with friendship? And also, how does friendship become a kind of work sometimes, particularly in the kind of online kind of labour, forms of online labour that a lot of us have to engage with today. There's a bit about movement, friendship on the move, which is kind of what we're doing here, I guess. Laura writes about the 19th century lecture tour as a place where kind of proto-socialist and anarchist movements would go and meet and actually talk to people on the road. And I write about, again, there's kind of all these bits that are fun to say out loud because they feel kind of a bit cringe, and I'm like, but yeah, I do. I write about noughties zine culture and punk DIY touring as something that a lot of people would say is not particularly necessarily radical, but I think it can be. There's a section on intergenerational friendship and thinking about history as a kind of form of friendship, which Laura will talk about more, I think. And then we have a section that I'll read a bit from about what we call bad friends. So the policing of friendship, the racist policing of gangs, particularly in London, with engaging with Luke's work, and the ways that space is policed for certain people. Friendship becomes very difficult to do. And also a large section on the undercover policing that's been happening in Britain for the last 50 years. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well, I reckon. And then we just finish by trying to link it to solidarity and how do we scale this up and internationalism. So that's just a small last chapter at the end. I'll read from the beginning, though, which starts embarrassingly with me talking in third person, so I apologise for the pretentiousness. But it's in Glasgow, where I live, and it's with a friend called Yvonne. Yvonne Blake is her name. Some of you might know her. She runs an organisation called Migrants Organising for Rights and Empowerment. It's an amazing organisation, No Borders, migrant justice organisation. And it starts, the first section is called Why Friendship, Yvonne and Jean. So we'll meet Jean in a minute.
I'm not Jean, but I will read as if I am.
But here's Yvonne. Okay. So Joel is sitting in a cafe in Glasgow with an old friend, Yvonne. They met years back through the Unity Centre, a drop-in space for people in the asylum and immigration system in Glasgow. Clear memories, the smell of instant coffee, the sound of the printer and the old office chairs squeaking, the constant hubbub of people filling out forms, playing with kids, offering advice, catching up. Today, over tea and bowls of soup, the two of them are doing an interview. Joel asks, what does friendship mean? Is it a useful thing to focus on? Yvonne thinks for a moment and takes a sip of tea. This is Yvonne. In Yarlswood, an immigration detention centre near London, I didn't know about unity, but without fail, twice a week I'd get a call from them. They would ask, how am I? How are things? They listened to what I had to say. For me, friendship means strength in the struggle, but vicariously. Vicarious support. If you were inside and two people get deported, nobody has any strength at all. But if we are outside, we are here. We are caring. You get, I don't know what to call it, like vicarious strength? Does that make sense? There are times when you're lying there and you're just lost, and that support encourages you, and you encourage other people, and there is a domino effect. Because, sometimes we're coming from countries with legacies of colonialism, capitalism, everything, that mean we can't share things, can't be ourselves. And at Unity, when these people see my file or see my monthly report or whatever, they are seeing things about me that even my family don't know. But nobody judges nobody. Friendship is being there for me, for people not judging, not, taking away their autonomy. Is de-autonomizing a word? She laughs loudly before turning back to a tone of serious reflection. It is two people walking together on this journey. If I laugh, you laugh. If I sit and rest, you sit and rest. If I'm sad, we are sad together. It's also about not forgetting the importance of hanging out at people's houses, talking rubbish. To be outside all that, we chat, we laugh. It has to be natural. You have to have a love for humanity, as opposed to it becoming a cause. This person has become part of you. So for Yvonne, each definition of friendship necessitated another. To reframe her words is to somehow reduce the power of them, but in them we find friendship described as acts of listening and support, an unjudgmental and intimate knowledge that contrasts with the familial, a love of humanity, in her words, that doesn't reduce people to an issue or cause, hanging out, shared autonomy, shared personhood. Beyond the insight of each point she presents, Yvonne's words also underline friendship's shifting meaning. One short conversation on the topic produces a beguiling set of definitions, explanations, and feelings. Some books about friendship would start with a similar evocation. Friendship is multifaceted, hard to define, contextual. Whilst agreeing broadly with this invocation of breadth, in this book, we are interested in writing about friendship in more specific ways, reading Yvonne's spiral of definitions not simply as an admittance of friendship's slippery ephemeralness. That's taken a few practices, that one. Friendship's slippery ephemeralness, but as an attempt to gain some purchase. Friends in Common has its roots in conversations like this one with Yvonne, trying to figure out with friends in acts of friendship the links between political struggle and interpersonal belonging, and what historical resonances might help us to do this. We want, like Yvonne, to think of friendship as struggle, and friendship through struggle. Friendship as both a political act in itself, a commitment to forming intimacies despite the individualizing and apathy-inducing capitalist machine, and as a key sustaining force within political struggles of various kinds. We want to think about building vicarious strength, in her words, across difference, within legacies of colonialism, capitalism, everything, again as she puts it. We want to treat friendship as foundational to revolutionary projects, not peripheral to the real intellectual meat of political ideas. We want to think about how friendship constitutes ideas in action across different historical junctures. We want to understand the life of ideas. And to do this, we need to foreground friendship. In doing so, we ended up thinking carefully about friendship's limits. We'll talk about this a bit later as well. What it means to build collective struggle against a capitalist machine that works to co-opt, contain, and destroy relational bonds that threaten it. Different sites can offer different ways into these discussions. For Laura, it was reading a John Marsden book about pen pals, Letters from Inside, 1991. That's some fellow fans. As a young teenager. In the book, one of the friends, Tracy, is incarcerated in a juvenile detention centre, and the other, Mandy, struggles with abuse at home. The novel unfolds as a series of letters that oscillate between the quotidian, school, boys, pets, and earnest attempts to navigate truth and trust and ethical tribulations. For Laura, the book prompted early reflection on the letter as a deliberative form of friendship, and on ideas of friendship across difference, friendship as solidarity. Years later, when living in the US as a student, these themes led Laura to the Black and Pink prison pen pal program, and to new forms of friendship found there. For me, like Yvonne, it was the Unity Centre. Opened in 2006 in Glasgow, Unity was initially focused on supporting people required to regularly sign or report as asylum seekers at the Home Office reporting centre around the corner. But it quickly became a general hub for informal immigration casework, activism, and socialising. At my first Unity volunteer training session in 2016, I was immediately struck by the focus on terminology. We use the word friend here, said one of the collective members running the session. Not client or service user, not asylum seeker or refugee. We tried to say friend. Unity made friendship a key part of its ethos and operational logic, threading together lineages of anti-racism, no borders politics, queerness and feminism that we try and unpack through the book. Later, when we started to write about friendship, why friendship was appearing in this way, that same collective member from Unity sent me an email about revolution and friendship, thanks Elle. In it, they included a PDF scan of a letter purportedly written by the French novelist, playwright, poet, and sometimes prisoner, Jean Genet. This is what the letter said.
Every night I'm like, I'll do it in a French accent. Still not the night. Letter from Jean. When you live with friends in intimacy, in both literal, can you hear it right? Is that okay? Literal and figurative nudity, and with a real try for directness of feeling. When you have shared jobs and goals with them that keep you all focused on the same target and moving together in a common rhythm. When the many weirdnesses and idiosyncrasies of you come floating to the surface in an everyday context, not just at work or during a planned meeting. When all these different parts of oneself are explored by those around you, because it affects them, because it affects the quality of our daily life, our work together, our sanity, because they must be explored. Because in reality, our very lives may depend on having analysed and understood or even changed a way of behaving. When we manifest our love this way, and I put love between quotations, I didn't, but there we go, because it takes so many new and unexpected forms, and keep showing our determination to be there and to continue together. When all this happens, the densest sort of bonds can be created. New and different ties between isolated individuals. They are born out of effort, striving. They happen. They can make you weak with wonder. A tissue of relationships that make you see other, more official, legal, sanctioned, inherited bonds seem fragile and arbitrary. Their law holds you together in their image. So when I think of my experience of these kinds of rich relationships, and then I read about the history of revolutionary and resistance movements, I am puzzled. It seems that in general, there's too much emphasis put on the role of ideas, on theory, principle, ideology, as the web that holds movements together and explains them. Have I misunderstood something? Is it words themselves? Of course, I don't mean ideas aren't important. Perhaps that's why we get together in the first place, the light that draws us there, rather than to a religious movement or any other number of possibilities. I'm not putting down thinking. Do I put down apples or breathing or the sky? And especially in resistance and revolutionary movements, where ideas, the life of ideas, and the exercise of thought in general, has a freer and more dynamic play, a more critical role, than anywhere else within the frightened and dying society outside. No, I'm not putting it down. I'm only saying that the new bonds created among combatants, the loyalties, the very new history they make together, all this goes a long way to explain a mystery. Why people put up with it. How they hang together through so much, even so much betrayal of the very principles that are said to motivate them. People put themselves into a meat grinder, a washing machine, a roller coaster. People try and turn themselves inside out. They go off knowing, even if only in their deepest hearts, that definitions of success are uncertain, ever-changing, and probably not measurable within their lifetime. For an idea, sure, and day to day. And Joel and I have read and reread that PDF many, many, many times since, and each time we find in it something so integral to the ideas of friendship that we talk about through the book. Striving, love, combat, rhythm, a very new kind of history. The resonances abound. It was this PDF that became a key point of discussion and bonding between us when we first started working on what would become this book, and we're becoming really good friends ourselves. The story of Genet's letter is still a bit of a mystery, though. We can't even be totally sure that he wrote it, despite some digging. Sometimes, though, a tissue of relationships can include obscure PDFs, a kind of reaching back to claim friendship with threads of history and struggle that might otherwise have been lost. Genet's vision of mutual striving, as well as the way in which we came to inhabit his words, is foundational to this book, and to one of the orientating concepts that we use throughout it, dense bonds. For when Genet talks about the densest sort of bonds, he captures something many of us have experienced, if not always managed to put into words. Maybe you linked arms at the squat eviction, shared a thermos at the picket line, walked that friend to a dreaded appointment, or experienced one of the innumerable other shared everyday confrontations with the meat grinder of capitalism. Such interactions are animated by, but also illuminate injustice, binding us in our action against it. through dense bonds, we become something different together. So that's sort of how we kind of open the book, and to hopefully give a sort of sense of where we start. And, as Joel said, through the book, there's lots of elements. We are both, as you might be able to tell, kind of romantic about friendship. We feel quite excited by these sort of radical potentials, but we don't pretend that, friendship is always easy at all, that it's always, easy to sustain, or that it always gives us this sense of richness and density. Of course not. So we try and, through the book, unpack different ways that friendship is often co-opted and contained within capitalism, or actually utilized as part of the reproduction of the kind of social hierarchies that exist today. And as Joel alluded to earlier, we also talk a bit about the way in which the state, despite sort of denigrating friendship in some ways, or putting it to the bottom of the relationship hierarchy, after family and other biological ties. On the other hand, the state obviously does show an interest in friendship when it seeks to police it through various forms. So in the spirit of us not having a discussion because we just want to ask each other easy questions, Joel, do you want to say a bit more about
yeah, absolutely.
a bit more about this, thinking about the policing of friendship?
Yeah, that'd be nice. Thanks, Laura. That's how you do a plan. Write a book with them. I think, so we do talk a lot in the book, despite how those first sections seem, and that hopefully that sense of excitement that you can get from, every time I hear Laura read Sinead, I'm just like, oh God, that guy. But what we understand as friendship today is obviously incredibly molded and shaped by the economic systems that we live in, and certain kinds of sociality are very much privileged. You can have, we're encouraged to have elite and expensive brunches where we kind of half network, half catch up every couple of weeks. I love brunch, to be clear. No shade on brunch. But there's certain kinds of elite sociality that are kind of encouraged and become almost socially reproductive in the ways that people have described the family, in terms of reinforcing the productive sort of side of the economy. And then there's ones that are obviously policed and kind of curtailed in lots of ways. In this kind of second to last chapter about that, we talk about the kind of what gets called the spy cop scandal, I guess, a lot, but just seems like a kind of insufficient word, scandal, doesn't it? The sheer scale, I think it's important to remember, as much as this has been bubbling away for a long time, the scale of undercover policing and the way that it targeted, so many people, from trade unionists to anti-fascists and anti-racists to feminist groups across the kind of wide spectrum of the left over the last 50 years, it's just been so corrosive to possibilities for trust and mutual activity and coalition building. And I think it's really hard to imagine what our left-wing politics in Britain could have been like if that hadn't been going on for the last 50 years. But I think I'll just read a little bit from this section about that, because I guess one of the points we're making is that, there's an incredible bravery, and it's only, as I said right at the start, it's only thanks to mainly, women who've come forward about coercive relationships that they went through with undercover police that this has even been put kind of in the agenda of the news. But I think something they point out a lot is how these guys were also targeting friendships, and they operated through friendships, and friendship was their kind of tool. So as much as as hard as it is to get there's no such thing as a friendship visa, right? And you can't the state doesn't allow friendship in that sort of legal way. It does police it in other ways. So I'll just read a little bit of this. This section's called Patter Paralysis. It's only thanks to the tireless campaigning of groups like Police Spies Out of Our Lives, formed by women who were, in their own words, deceived into intimate sexual relationships with undercover officers, the undercover research group and spycops.info, that the practices and scale of undercover policing have been unearthed. Naomi, one of the 5 women involved in the former group, who went on to write Deep Deception, the story of the spy cop network by the women who uncovered the shocking truth, which is well worth reading, obviously, makes it clear how integral coercive friendships were to undercover officers. Many people, this is her words, had also been close friends with Mark, the undercover police officer Mark Kennedy, alias Mark Stone, one of the most notorious ones. So, while discussing the relationships he had, we mustn't forget the friendships these officers also betrayed. When I first met Mark, I thought we had many friends in common. It would be over a decade before I learned that his understanding of that community and these friendships and connections was prior knowledge gained from other undercover cops spying on social justice networks over the years. Spying simply for the sake of spying, to infiltrate our lives and to observers. The extent to which he would betray every one of those friendships was completely undreamt of. It seems impossible to unimagine the betrayal now, to go back to a time before that knowledge seeped into our bones. But it never really even occurred to me then that Mark Stone was anything other than my friend. So SpyCops.info was started by one other such deceived friend, Tom Fowler, a South Wales anarchist activist who found out that his friend and comrade in the group, Marco Jacobs, was an undercover police spy. Tom's got a really great podcast that you should listen to on SpyCops.info, but in a podcast interview, Fowler described the personal toll this took on him. This is his words. I knew an undercover cop quite well. He was a close personal friend of mine. He befriended a few of us separately at first and then was like, oh, you know Michael as well? No way. He was funny as fuck. I have to give him credit for that. He had a whole patter. Maybe he was just tuning into my humour on purpose, but he was funny. So this guy Jacobs cultivated a blokiness, an opaque working class history, posing as a truck driver to justify extended periods of time spent back in his real life. It also centred around heavy drinking, pubs, and the social centre and party scene. As another activist, Verity Smith, recounts, he would be down the pub all the time. He would always have money for drinks. He would be very keen to encourage people to go out drinking with him, and he used that time to really probe people and what they thought and what their attitudes were, and what their opinions were, what their vulnerabilities were. Jacobs was, also, in Fowler's terms, a massive fucking gossip, raking over people's private and personal details, and exhausting people with internal bullshit. So I say a bit about how that was kind of part of the way these guys were trained, was to deliberately do that across these movements. And I think maybe we kind of talk about how that goes into the current kind of moment we're in and the history of that. But I guess I thought maybe I'll just finish with one of the other writers of that book, Deep Deception, who she writes this email to Mark Stone, her former partner, after he kind of pleaded with her for forgiveness in the aftermath of being outed as a spy cop. This is from 2010, November. And she says, I'm not sure I can begin to know what to say. A bomb has exploded in my life, blowing it apart and also affecting dozens and dozens of amazing people who considered you a friend. Quite frankly, I'm still numb with shock. I'm afraid there's no fairy tale ending to this story. You might have thought you were living a life in a film script, being the exciting double agent, but I'm sorry you don't get to run off with the girl in the end. I'm being shown such a huge amount of fiercely true love from so many incredible people that I can't let down. I choose them. So I think that's an incredibly moving way of thinking about how these people who, went through something completely unimaginable actually have found, in a kind of almost counterintuitive way, through friendship with other people who have exposed this, and through the connections that they've remade, against all odds, really, right? That it is possible, and that they, and I think we can learn from that in our movements as well. I won't say any more for now. I think maybe I'll start talking a bit and ask Laura a little bit, because Laura is a historian. Who also has is it an historian? Yeah, I guess an historian. Anyway.
It's officially Anne, but it always sounds wrong when
Laura
I
say
say
it. Laura is an historian and also has another book out this year about the Paris Commune, which I've enjoyed embarrassing about her about every time, because that's amazing. Who writes 2 books in a year? Jeez. But yeah, I think I was interested maybe if you could say a little bit about how we've approached the question of history through a lens of friendship, and just kind of a bit also about, I guess, the kind of title and this idea of commons and the common, which we get into the end. I mean, it's nice to think about those two things together, maybe, and what it means to kind of do history through friendship, maybe.
Yeah. Thanks,
and then we'll open it out.
An excellent and surprising question.
Yeah.
So of course, through the book, a lot of our kind of ways into this was partly, I'm a historian of the 19th century and would look, like Jean Genet said, looking at these kind of histories of radical movements in the 19th century and thinking, I feel like we're kind of, obviously it's much easier to find those stories through institutional histories of organizations or particular characters who left behind published works, etc. But always getting the sense that we're kind of missing a big part of the story, like when we think about our own political lives, so much of that is mediated through friendship, and that's true for the 19th century as well. So we started thinking, how do we look for those histories by using friendship as a kind of organizing principle, and thinking more about the kind of informal and affective forms of feelings, friendships, connections that help to develop political subjectivities then and now. So that's one way in, and obviously with thinking through things like, spy cops, thinking about those longer histories and thinking about how forms of friendship have been policed through history. But the other way I guess we came at it was also to think about friendships themselves as kind of archives of these sorts of histories. So tracing histories, through our own friends, through kind of thinking through what a lineage of friendship might look like, a kind of anti-family tree, to think about lineages beyond the nation or the family. And then I suppose in doing so, we talk a bit in the book about thinking about, in that way, history itself is a kind of intergenerational friendship, a sort of way that you kind of find friends in the past, whether they like it or not, and sort of feel the sense of affinity, which is very powerful in how how historical characters can talk back to you, and you get a feeling of friendship across time and this idea of befriending the dead. So we talk quite a lot about that in the book, and I think throughout the book, elements, maybe there is quite a lot in there, and somehow seems slightly chaotic, but I think to us it all made sense through this idea of talking between past, present, and future, and thinking across those scales, and imagining that as a type of almost conversations through time. So we sort of, I guess for ourselves at least, conceptualize the book a little bit that way. I guess the title and the end, I'll say a little bit about how we kind of thought a little bit about that history of the commons, and what that might mean in terms of thinking through, I suppose, a sort of a way of using friendship as this sort of organizing principle. So I'll just read from this last section, which is called Friends in Common. What does it mean then to be in common? We called this book Friends in Common, partly because that's how we met, through a friend in common. But also because for us, the phrase speaks to friendship beyond proximate interpersonal intimacy. It signals dense bonds, as you mentioned, as modes of belonging that can encompass anonymous, fleeting affinity and deeply enmeshed personhood. We also intended the title to be a nod to the commons, to the process of commoning, of holding things in common. As the anthropologist Miriam Ticktin outlines, the commons has come to mean many things and is practiced by many different people, indigenous communities, black and brown communities, ecologists, anarchists. But it's often referred to as a struggle against enclosure, against the privatization of spaces of freedom, exclusion, and perhaps most importantly, private property. It can also mean the sharing of wealth and resources on the basis of collective decision-making. Sometimes it is spoken of as grounded in social relations built on reciprocity, respect, mutuality, and responsibility. Joel and I chose not to start this book with what we all have in common, though, as tempting as such rhetoric often is. Instead, we hope that the assortment of ideas assembled in this book point a different way towards commonality, not as intrinsic or universal, but as emerging through struggle and discussion, always in process. The history of the left, particularly in the European and US context, is littered with examples of unilateral declarations of solidarity and evocations of a collective we, of an assumed common ground, that dampens often the possibilities for genuine coalition work and self-reflection, and can actually be quite exclusionary. This idea emerges in dialogue with an ahistorical notion of the commons, and of common land in particular, that has been endlessly romanticized and sort of imagined as a utopian space open to all. In fact, the commons of the past were never intrinsically free for all to use. Common land was never owned by commoners. It was owned by the lord of the manor, the aristocrats, but it could be communally used and legally accessed for particular purposes. The rights of use of the commons were not universal. The commons has always been made through a patchwork of customary rights, shifting agreements, and knotty negotiations. These negotiations could be fraught with jealousy and scheming, and the privatization and commercialization of common rights has been ongoing since at least the 17th century. Indeed, some forms of enclosure were enacted or encouraged by commoners themselves in order to broker more lucrative deals with landowners or other commoners. Importantly, though, the process of commoning was determined by the people involved, the people for whom the commons meant something, rather than by the application of a rigid set of principles prescribed from a far-off place. Enclosure, then, is the removal of this common right to use the land, and it comes in various forms. In Britain, the enclosure of the commons accelerated in the 18th century, but it was a much longer process stretching back to the 13th century, and it continues today. Gradually, through a combination of legal decrees, private acts, and bureaucratic processes, huge amount of land across Britain moved from a system of shared open fields with no hedges or fences to a system of enclosed private farms. This process has been consistently and ferociously challenged throughout its long history. So as Miriam Ticktin said, the commons should be understood as really as the struggle against enclosure. The fierce protests that people enacted and the radical activities they pursued to resist enclosure are where we find the real allure of the commons. In other words, the commons represents long histories of connected struggle and the imaginative possibilities that these histories continue to generate. Perhaps then, we might find in the commons something like the logic of friendship. It's not automatically open to all, but nor does it automatically prescribe criteria via which to exclude or enclose. Friendship is always predicated on relationality, on negotiation. It's always in process, always changing. It cannot be prescriptive or universal, but therein lies precisely its power. Many of our present-day democratic ideas have been built instead on an ideal of a universal public, protected by a universal set of principles, guaranteeing supposedly justice and fairness. And yet the reality many of us experience is the converse, a closing down of openness, vicious individualism, and dangerous practices of exclusion. This raises questions we'd need to come back to, and we hope other people might have thoughts on. What would it mean to recommend land, space, and resources for mutual and shared use? How might this apply to other forms of kind of digital commons and other spaces of discussion? What can we learn about creating the conditions for friendship and anti-capitalist social reproduction from histories of struggle around the commons? As an initial step, and in this book really, we really want to emphasize the importance of naming the violent, differentiated histories that underpin these processes. And we really want to, we seek to avoid a universalizing or romantic view of either the commons or of friendship, and instead letting the concepts pull us into the messy, everyday specifics of political struggle, drawing our connections from there rather than from above. Solidarity, coalition building, accompaniment, mutual association, friendship, these all require being honest about what we don't have in common as much as what we do. So I'll just leave it there for now, I think. Hopefully provoked some thoughts. And yeah, I guess we wanted to, especially because it's so hot, I feel like I'm melting, to just open it up and let people, thoughts, questions.
Yeah, I mean, in the spirit of that as well, like we've all been at some awful Q&As, but honestly, the last 7 Q&As have been really nice, and it's possible to have nice Q&As, and like I think we should remember that, and it can include comments sometimes, and as long as we all just keep a bit of check on ourselves. There's a couple of seats here, by the way. If anyone's standing up, there's 2 seats at the front, if that's not too intimidating.
It's near the fan as well.
It's also near the fan. But we thought it would be nice to just have a conversation. If people want to ask things, if people want to say things, is anyone feeling brave to kick us off and maybe get going?
Yeah. Yes, sir.